Detective Sarah Martinez stood in the marble hallway of Franklin County Courthouse, her reflection distorted in the polished floor beneath her feet. The coffee in her paper cup had gone cold an hour ago, but she continued to grip it like a lifeline, her knuckles white against the brown cardboard. Outside, October rain pelted the tall windows, creating rivulets that reminded her of tears she refused to shed. Courtroom 3B loomed before her like a confession booth, its heavy wooden doors hiding the drama that would unfold within the next few hours. She'd testified in hundreds of cases over her 15-year career, but today felt different. Today, the weight of justice pressed against her chest like a boulder, making each breath a conscious effort. Marcus Thompson's case should have been routine. A simple traffic stop 6 months ago on Route 23, just outside Columbus. Officer Jake Morrison had pulled over the blue Honda Civic for a broken taillight, and Rex, the department's golden retriever, K-9 officer, had immediately alerted to the presence of narcotics. The search yielded a small bag of cocaine hidden in the glove compartment, enough to charge Thompson with felony drug possession. On paper, it was textbook police work. Rex's service record was exemplary. 97% accuracy rate, over 300 successful drug seizures, and countless commendations from supervisors and judges alike. The German Shepherd was practically a legend in the department, his photograph hanging in the lobby next to fallen officers and Medal of Valor recipients. But Sarah had noticed changes in Rex over the past few months, subtle at first, and increasingly disturbing. The dog had grown aggressive during routine training exercises, snapping at handlers and showing signs of anxiety that concerned even the veteran K-9 officers. During a community outreach event at Lincoln Elementary School, Rex had lunged at a group of children, forcing Morrison to quickly pull him away with stammered excuses about the dog being tired from training. She tried to bring her concerns to Captain Williams, but he dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Rex is fine, Martinez. Don't let your imagination run wild. That dog has helped us put away more dealers than the rest of the department." Combined, the conversation had ended there, but Sarah's doubts had only grown stronger. The prosecutor, District Attorney Michael Preston, had built his case around Rex's reputation and the physical evidence. Preston was ambitious, his eyes set on the state attorney general's office, and high-profile drug convictions looked good on political resumes. He'd briefed Sarah on her testimony the previous evening, emphasizing the importance of painting Rex as an infallible crime-fighting machine. "Just stick to the facts, detective," Preston had said, adjusting his expensive tie in the reflection of his office window. "Rex alerted, you searched, you found drugs. Simple as that. Don't overthink it." But Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Marcus Thompson's face during the arrest. The man had looked genuinely shocked when they pulled the cocaine from his glove compartment, his protests of innocence so raw and desperate that she'd almost believed him. Thompson worked 2 jobs to support his 7-year-old daughter after losing his wife in a car accident. He'd never had so much as a parking ticket on his record, let alone any involvement with drugs. The courthouse bustled with typical morning activity around her. Lawyers wheeled briefcases down the hallways, their heels clicking against the marble in rhythmic percussion. Witnesses huddled in small groups, whispering nervously about their upcoming testimonies. Family members of defendants sat on wooden benches, their faces etched with worry and hope in equal measure. Sarah spotted Emma Thompson through the glass doors of courtroom 3B. The little girl sat in the gallery's back row, between her grandmother and a family friend. A coloring book spread across her lap, and a box of worn crayons scattered beside her. Emma's dark hair was pulled back in pigtails tied with yellow ribbons, and she wore a blue dress that looked like it had been carefully selected for this important day. The child seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation, humming softly as she colored pictures of princesses and castles. Occasionally, she would look up from her artwork, to scan the courtroom with curious eyes, taking in the formal atmosphere with the wonder only a 7-year-old could possess. Her grandmother kept a protective arm around her shoulders, whispering reassurances whenever Emma asked questions about the proceedings. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Where are you? We start in 10 minutes. Remember, stick to the script." She took a deep breath and checked her appearance in the reflection of a framed photograph hanging on the wall. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, her navy blazer pressed and lint-free. She looked like the competent, reliable detective she'd always prided herself on being. But inside, her conscience waged war with her duty. As she pushed through the heavy doors into courtroom 3B, Sarah noticed Officer Morrison already seated in the witness area, his uniform impeccable. As always, Rex wasn't present. Police dogs were only brought to court when specifically required for demonstration purposes. Morrison nodded confidently at her, his expression conveying absolute certainty in the righteousness of their case. The courtroom filled quickly with spectators, court officials, and members of the press who'd caught wind of another successful drug bust in the ongoing war against narcotics. Judge Robert Hayes entered through his private door, his black robes flowing behind him like wings. The bailiff called for order, and the machinery of justice began its inexorable march toward what seemed like an inevitable conviction. Sarah took her seat in the witness waiting area, her hands still trembling slightly as she set down her empty coffee cup. She had no idea that the little girl with yellow ribbon pigtails, quietly coloring in the back row, would soon speak two simple words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about justice, truth, and the price of staying silent when conscience demands courage. Marcus Thompson's hands shook as he adjusted the burgundy tie his mother-in-law had bought him specifically for this day. The fabric felt foreign against his neck. He was more accustomed to work boots and safety vests than courtroom attire. His calloused fingers, scarred from years of construction work and factory labor, struggled with the unfamiliar knot as he sat in the defendant's chair, acutely aware that this could be his last morning as a free man. The borrowed navy suit hung loosely on his lean frame, a size too large despite his mother-in-law's best efforts at alterations. Dorothy had insisted on buying it from a thrift store downtown, spending money she could barely afford on the slim hope that looking respectable might somehow influence the jury. The pants were hemmed with visible stitching, and the jacket sleeves extended slightly past his wrists, but it was the best they could manage on a factory worker's salary. Behind him in the gallery, Emma sat between Dorothy and Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor who had volunteered to help watch his daughter during the trial. At 7 years old, Emma didn't fully understand why Daddy had to come to this big, scary building with all the serious-looking people in black robes. She only knew that Grandma Dorothy cried a lot lately, especially when she thought Emma wasn't looking. Marcus turned slightly to catch a glimpse of his daughter, his heart breaking at the sight of her small legs swinging from the wooden bench. She wore the blue dress with white flowers that his late wife, Maria, had bought for Emma's first day of kindergarten 2 years ago. Dorothy had insisted on the dress, saying Maria would have wanted Emma to look her best on such an important day. The sight of it transported Marcus back to happier times when his biggest worry was whether Emma had remembered to pack her lunch or if she'd completed her homework. Maria had died in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on Interstate 71 returning home from her nursing shift at Riverside Hospital. The other driver walked away without a scratch while Marcus's world crumbled into pieces. He'd become a single father overnight, juggling his day job at Patterson Manufacturing with weekend construction work to pay the mounting bills. The life insurance had barely covered Maria's funeral expenses and the outstanding medical debt from Emma's birth complications years earlier. His public defender, Lisa Chun, sat beside him shuffling through manila folders with the desperation of someone trying to build a sandcastle against an incoming tsunami. At 32, she was younger than Marcus, and overwhelmed by her caseload of indigent clients. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of too many late nights, spent preparing impossible defenses for clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. "Mr. Thompson," she whispered, leaning close enough that he could smell her drugstore perfume, "I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. The prosecution's case is very strong. Rex's track record, the physical evidence, Officer Morrison's testimony. It's going to be difficult to create reasonable doubt." Marcus had heard these words before, but they still hit him like physical blows. 15 years in state prison. That's what the prosecutor was seeking. Emma would be 22 when he got out, a grown woman who might barely remember the father who'd read her bedtime stories and kissed her scraped knees. She'd grow up believing her daddy was a criminal, a drug dealer who'd abandoned her when she needed him most. The irony burned in his throat like acid. Marcus had never even smoked marijuana, let alone dealt cocaine. After losing Maria to a drunk driver, he'd sworn off all substances, even the beer he used to enjoy while watching Sunday football. He couldn't risk leaving Emma orphaned by making a foolish decision under the influence of alcohol or drugs. But who would believe him? A struggling factory worker with a deceased wife and mounting debts. Looked like the perfect profile for someone desperate enough to deal drugs. The prosecutor had already painted him as a man driven to crime by financial pressure, someone who'd risk his daughter's future for quick cash. The truth was that Marcus had been working overtime at the factory the night before his arrest, putting in a 16-hour shift to earn double-time pay for Emma's upcoming school field trip to the Science Museum. He'd been exhausted, driving home on Route 23 with his eyes burning from fatigue, when Officer Morrison's patrol car had appeared in his rearview mirror with flashing lights. The broken taillight was news to Marcus. He'd had no idea the plastic cover had cracked. He'd been polite and cooperative, providing his license and registration without argument. When Morrison had asked permission to search the vehicle, Marcus had agreed immediately, confident that there was nothing to find except Emma's car seat and his work thermos. Then Rex had arrived, and everything had changed in an instant. The dog had circled his Honda Civic twice before suddenly alerting at the passenger door, pawing frantically at the handle while Morrison watched with satisfaction. The search had yielded a small plastic bag, hidden behind the glove compartment's manual, a bag Marcus had never seen before in his life. "I don't understand," Marcus had protested as Morrison handcuffed him beside his car. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before. Please, I have a little girl at home. She needs me." But Morrison had heard it all before. Every dealer claimed innocence. Every criminal had a sob story. The evidence spoke for itself, and Rex didn't lie. Now, 6 months later, Marcus sat in a courtroom watching his world collapse in slow motion. Emma hummed softly behind him, coloring in a princess book that Dorothy had brought to keep her occupied during the boring adult proceedings. The sound of her innocent contentment nearly broke his composure. Lisa Chun placed a reassuring hand on his arm, her touch gentle but lacking conviction. They both knew the odds. Rex's reputation was unassailable, the physical evidence overwhelming, and Marcus's protests of innocence would sound hollow against such compelling testimony. As Judge Hayes called the court to order, Marcus closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to Maria, wherever she might be watching from above. If he was convicted today, he'd need her to help Dorothy raise their daughter, to somehow explain to a little girl why her daddy couldn't come home anymore. Officer Jake Morrison strode to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had testified in over 200 criminal trials. His uniform was immaculate, every crease razor sharp, every button polished to mirror brightness, his badge gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. At 43, Morrison had spent 18 years building his reputation as one of Ohio's most successful canine officers, and his partnership with Rex had become legendary throughout the state's law enforcement community. The bailiff administered the oath with practiced efficiency, and Morrison placed his right hand on the worn leather Bible, his voice clear and unwavering as he swore to tell the truth. District Attorney Preston approached the witness stand with the swagger of a prosecutor who knew he held all the winning cards. The two men had worked together dozens of times before, their courtroom choreography as polished as a Broadway production. "Officer Morrison," Preston began, his voice carrying the authority that had helped him win 3 consecutive elections. "Please tell the court about your experience with K-9 units." Morrison straightened his shoulders, his chest expanding with obvious pride. "I've been a certified K-9 handler for 12 years, sir. I graduated from the Ohio State Highway Patrol K-9 Academy in 2011, and I've attended advanced training seminars in drug detection, explosive detection, and suspect apprehension techniques. Rex and I have been partners for 8 years now." The prosecutor nodded approvingly, then gestured toward a large photograph mounted on an easel beside the jury box. The image showed Rex in full working gear, his official K-9 vest emblazoned with police insignia, his alert German Shepherd features radiating intelligence and dedication. Several jurors leaned forward to get a better look at the famous dog they'd heard so much about in local news reports. "Tell us about Rex's training and qualifications," Preston continued, his tone suggesting that they were discussing a decorated war hero rather than a 4-legged animal. Morrison's eyes lit up as he launched into what sounded like a well-rehearsed speech. Rex completed 16 weeks of intensive narcotics detection training at the State Academy. He's certified to detect cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, and several synthetic drugs. His accuracy rate in controlled testing environments is 97.3%, one of the highest in the state. He's been responsible for over 300 successful drug seizures during his career, resulting in convictions worth millions of dollars in street value. The jury hung on every word. Morrison had mastered the art of making Rex sound less like a dog and more like a sophisticated piece of crime-fighting technology. He explained the rigorous testing procedures, the monthly recertification requirements, and the meticulous records kept of every training session and field deployment. Preston introduced Exhibit A, Rex's official certification documents, stamped with official seals and signed by 3 different training supervisors. The pages were passed among the jurors like sacred texts, their impressive letterheads and technical language lending an air of scientific authority to what was essentially a dog's ability to sniff out drugs. "Now, Officer Morrison, directing. Your attention to the evening of April 15th. Please describe the circumstances that led to the defendant's arrest." Morrison shifted slightly in his chair, his expression growing serious as he recalled the events of that night. "I was on patrol along Route 23 around 11:47 p.m. when I observed a blue Honda Civic with a broken left taillight. I initiated a traffic stop approximately 2 miles south of the Worthington exit." He painted a picture of textbook police procedure, the polite approach to the vehicle, the request for license and registration, the routine questioning of a tired-looking driver who claimed to be heading home from work. Marcus Thompson had been cooperative, Morrison testified, showing no obvious signs of nervousness or deception during their initial interaction. "The defendant consented to a vehicle search?" Preston asked, though they both knew the answer. "Yes, sir. When I asked if he had any objections to me looking through his car, Mr. Thompson said, 'Go ahead, I've got nothing to hide.' He seemed very confident about it." Morrison described how he'd returned to his patrol car to retrieve Rex, the dog eager and alert after spending several hours confined to the vehicle's climate-controlled K-9 compartment. The moment Rex's paws touched the asphalt beside Marcus's Honda, According to Morrison's testimony, the dog's entire demeanor had changed. Rex immediately went into what we call hunt mode, Morrison explained to the wrapped jury. His nose went to the ground, his tail went rigid, and he began working the perimeter of the vehicle in a systematic search pattern. This is behavior we've trained extensively. Rex knows the difference between casual interest and a positive drug detection. The prosecutor introduced a series of photographs taken at the scene. Rex circling the Honda, his nose pressed against various surfaces, his body language allegedly indicating the presence of narcotics. Morrison narrated each image like a nature documentary, explaining the subtle signs that only a trained canine handler could interpret. And then Rex alerted? Preston prompted. Yes, sir. At 12:03 a.m., Rex gave a clear positive indication at the passenger side door. He began pawing at the handle and whining behavior that specifically indicates the presence of controlled substances within the vehicle. Morrison described the subsequent search in meticulous detail, the systematic examination of the interior, the careful removal of floor mats and seat cushions, and finally, the discovery of the small plastic bag wedged behind the glove compartments. Owner's Manual, Exhibit B, was introduced with theatrical flourish, the cocaine that had allegedly ended Marcus Thompson's life as a free man. The evidence bag was passed among the jurors, its contents looking unremarkably small for something that could destroy a family. Morrison testified about the field test that had confirmed the substance's identity, the careful documentation of its location, and the unbroken chain of custody that had preserved its integrity as evidence in the gallery. Emma Thompson watched the proceedings with the fascination of a child, observing an elaborate adult game she didn't quite understand. Her coloring book lay forgotten in her lap as she listened to the stories about the smart doggy who could find hidden things. Her grandmother squeezed her hand gently, unaware that the little girl's innocent curiosity was about to become the key to unraveling the carefully constructed case unfolding before them. Lisa Chun rose from the defendant's table with the weight of impossible expectations pressing down on her shoulders. At 32, she had been practicing criminal defense for only 6 years, most of that time spent in the trenches of public defense, where victories were measured not in acquittals, but in reduced sentences and plea bargains that kept clients out of maximum security prisons. Her caseload of 43 active cases meant she rarely had time to prepare the kind of defense her clients deserved, and Marcus Thompson's case was no different. She approached Officer Morrison with a legal pad covered in hastily scrawled notes, knowing that her cross-examination would likely feel like throwing pebbles at a fortress. Morrison sat relaxed in the witness chair, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who had faced down dozens of defense attorneys over the years. His slight smirk suggested he was already anticipating her questions and preparing his well-rehearsed responses. Officer Morrison, Chun began, her voice steadier than she felt. You testified that Rex has a 97.3% accuracy rate. Can you tell the court about the 2.7% of cases where Rex was wrong? Morrison's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Rex has never given a false positive in the field, counselor. The small percentage you're referring to comes from controlled training scenarios, where we deliberately test the dog's limits with increasingly difficult detection challenges. Chun had expected this answer, but she pressed forward anyway. So you're stating under oath that, in 8 years of active duty, Rex has never once alerted to a vehicle that didn't contain drugs? That's correct. The confidence in Morrison's voice was absolute, but Lisa noticed something she hadn't caught during her preparation. A slight twitch at the corner of his left eye, barely perceptible, but there nonetheless. She made a mental note and continued her questioning. Officer Morrison, what was Rex's behavior like on the evening of April 15th, prior to the traffic? Stop? Morrison paused for just a fraction of a second, long enough for an experienced defense attorney to notice. But Lisa was too focused on her notes to catch the hesitation. Rex was alert and ready for duty, as always. Had Rex worked any other cases that evening? No, ma'am. The Thompson stop was our first call of the night. Lisa flipped through her legal pad, searching for anything that might create reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds. She found a notation about Rex's training schedule and decided to pursue it. When was Rex's last recertification training, officer? Morrison? Rex completed his quarterly recertification on March 20th, approximately 3 weeks before the traffic stop in question. And he passed all requirements? Again, that barely perceptible pause. Yes, he did. In the witness waiting area, Detective Sarah Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her plastic chair. She remembered the March recertification session clearly because she'd been assigned to help supervise the exercises. Rex had been uncharacteristically aggressive that day, snapping at 2 different handlers and showing signs of anxiety during the detection drills. The supervising officer had noted Rex's behavior in the initial report, but those comments had mysteriously disappeared from the final certification documents. Lisa pressed on, grasping for straws in an ocean of seemingly solid evidence. Officer Morrison, in your experience, can environmental factors affect a drug detection dog's performance? What do you mean by environmental factors? Weather conditions? Traffic noise? The presence of other strong odors? Anything that might interfere with a dog's ability to detect narcotics accurately? Morrison nodded professionally. Dogs' olfactory capabilities are remarkably sensitive, but we train them to work in all kinds of conditions. Rex has successfully detected drugs during thunderstorms, at busy intersections, even at scenes where gas leaks created strong competing odors. Lisa felt her heart sinking as Morrison effortlessly deflected each line of questioning. The jury was clearly impressed by his expertise and Rex's legendary capabilities. Several jurors were taking notes, apparently convinced by Morrison's authoritative responses. In the gallery, Emma Thompson had grown increasingly restless during the lengthy questioning. She whispered to her grandmother about needing to use the bathroom, but Dorothy was too focused on the proceedings to respond immediately. Emma studied Officer Morrison with the intense curiosity that only children possess, her young mind trying to process the disconnect between the nice policeman everyone was praising and something troubling that lurked at the edges of her memory. 3 months earlier, Emma had been excited about the police demonstration at Lincoln Elementary School. Officer Morrison and Rex were supposed to show the children how police dogs helped catch bad guys and find dangerous things. Emma had been selected to help with the demonstration because she'd written the best essay about community helpers in her 2nd grade class. But something had gone wrong. Rex had been acting strangely from the moment he'd arrived at the school, pacing nervously and whining in a way that seemed different from his usual working sounds. When Emma had approached to pet him as instructed, Rex had suddenly lunged forward, his teeth grazing her arm before Morrison had yanked him back with a sharp command. The incident had happened so quickly that most of the children hadn't seen it clearly. Morrison had immediately knelt beside Emma, his voice filled with concern and apologies. "I'm so sorry, sweetie." Rex was just excited. He didn't mean to scare you. School officials had rushed Emma to the nurse's office, where a small scrape on her forearm had been cleaned and bandaged. Later that day, Emma had overheard hushed conversations between her grandmother and the school principal about incident reports and liability concerns. Adults had used words like settlement and confidential, terms that meant nothing to a 7-year-old but carried weight in the grown-up world. Now, sitting in the courtroom listening to Officer Morrison describe Rex as a perfectly trained, completely reliable detection dog, Emma felt that same confused disconnect she'd experienced at school. The man on the witness stand sounded so sure, so confident, but Emma remembered the fear in Rex's eyes that day, and the fear in her own heart when the good doggie had suddenly become something else entirely. Lisa Chun concluded her cross-examination with a sense of defeat, knowing she'd failed to create the reasonable doubt that might save her client. As Morrison stepped down from the witness stand with his reputation intact, Emma Thompson continued to study him with the unsettling intensity of a child who sensed that something important was being left unsaid. The courtroom had settled into the rhythmic cadence of legal proceedings, with District Attorney Preston preparing to call his next witness, when Emma Thompson suddenly shifted in her seat. Her grandmother Dorothy had been whispering reassurances about how the boring adult talking would be over soon, but Emma's attention remained fixed on Officer Morrison as he gathered his notes at the witness table. Something deep in her 7-year-old mind was crystallizing a memory that had been buried beneath months of adult explanations and careful redirections. Dorothy felt Emma tense beside her and instinctively tightened her protective grip around the child's shoulders. "Sit still, sweetheart," she whispered, not wanting to disturb the solemn proceedings. But Emma's small body was coiling like a spring, her breath coming faster as she stared at Morrison with growing recognition and mounting distress. The memory came flooding back with startling clarity. The elementary school gymnasium decorated with red, white, and blue streamers for Community Helper Week. Principal Martinez had introduced Officer Morrison and Rex to enthusiastic applause from 200 excited children sitting cross-legged on the polished hardwood floor. Emma had been chosen to help with the demonstration because of her award-winning essay about police officers, and she'd felt so proud wearing the special Junior Police Helper badge they'd pinned to her pink sweater. But Rex hadn't looked like the happy, confident police dog from the pictures in Emma's classroom books. The German Shepherd had paced nervously at the end of his leash, his ears flattened against his head and his tail tucked low between his legs. When Officer Morrison had commanded Rex to sit, the dog had obeyed reluctantly, his entire body trembling with barely contained anxiety. "Now, Emma," Morrison had said with his practiced public relations smile, "Rex is going to show everyone how police dogs help keep our community safe. Would you like to pet him while I explained his training?" Emma had approached eagerly, her small hand extended toward Rex's head, just as she'd been taught to greet friendly dogs. But Rex's behavior had changed in an instant. His lips had pulled back in a silent snarl, his hackles rising as a low growl rumbled deep in his throat. Before Morrison could react, Rex had lunged forward with startling speed, his teeth catching Emma's outstretched forearm and sending her tumbling backward onto the gymnasium floor. The room had erupted in chaos. Children screamed and scrambled away from the aggressive dog, while teachers rushed forward to help. Morrison had yanked Rex back with a sharp correction, but the damage was done. Emma's pink sweater was torn, and a thin line of blood seeped through the fabric where Rex's teeth had grazed her skin. "I'm so sorry," Morrison had exclaimed, dropping to his knees beside the frightened child. Rex was just excited. "He's never done anything like this before. You're okay, sweetie. Rex didn't mean to hurt you." But Emma had seen something in Rex's eyes that contradicted Morrison's reassuring words, a wildness that spoke of fear and confusion rather than excitement. The dog hadn't been playing or showing enthusiasm. Rex had been genuinely aggressive, genuinely dangerous, and Emma's child instincts had recognized the threat even when the adults had rushed to explain it away. Now, 6 months later, Emma listened to Officer Morrison describe Rex as a perfectly trained, completely reliable police dog, and the contradiction became unbearable. The nice policeman was saying Rex was good and smart and helpful, but Emma knew better. Rex was the bad dog who had hurt her, who had scared her so badly that she'd had nightmares for weeks afterward. Dorothy felt Emma's tension reaching a breaking point and tried once more to settle her down. "Emma, honey, please sit quietly. Daddy needs us to." "No." Emma's voice cut through the courthouse atmosphere like a fire alarm. She wrenched herself free from Dorothy's grasp and shot to her feet, her small frame vibrating with the righteous indignation that only children can muster when confronted with adult dishonesty. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the gallery as Emma pointed an accusing finger directly at Officer Morrison. Her voice, high and clear and impossibly brave, carried across the stunned silence with the force of absolute truth. "Bad dog?" The two words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Judge Hayes paused with his gavel halfway raised, unsure whether to call for order or allow the interruption. The jurors stared in confusion, trying to process this unexpected outburst from a child who shouldn't even understand the proceedings. Morrison's face went white as recognition dawned. He remembered the elementary school incident, the one that had been quietly settled with a small payment to cover Emma's medical expenses and a confidentiality agreement that sealed all records of Rex's aggressive behavior. But Emma wasn't finished. Her child's sense of justice, uncorrupted by adult concerns about legal strategy or political consequences, demanded that the truth be told. She stamped her small foot for emphasis and repeated her accusation, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Bad dog. He hurt me. He's not a good doggy. He's mean and scary, and he bites people." Dorothy gasped in horror, finally understanding what her granddaughter was trying to communicate. The elementary school incident, the one they'd all agreed never to mention again, the one that had been carefully buried beneath legal paperwork and hushed conversations, was exploding back into the light with the unstoppable force of a child's honesty. Marcus Thompson spun around in his chair, his eyes widening as he saw his daughter's passionate defense of his innocence. Emma's words were shattering the prosecution's carefully constructed narrative with the simple, devastating power of first-hand experience. Lisa Chun felt her heart racing as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a child's random outburst. This was testimony about Rex's behavioral history, evidence that could completely undermine Morrison's claims about the dog's reliability and training. Officer Morrison sat frozen at the witness table, his earlier confidence evaporating as his carefully guarded secret became a public accusation delivered by the most credible witness imaginable, an innocent child with no agenda beyond telling the truth about what she'd experienced. The courtroom remained suspended in stunned silence as Emma's words echoed off the walls, two simple syllables that had just changed everything about Marcus Thompson's fight for freedom. Bad dog. The silence following Emma's accusation stretched for what felt like an eternity before Judge Hayes brought his gavel down with three sharp strikes that echoed through the courtroom like gunshots. "Order. I will have order in this court." His voice carried the authority of 3 decades on the bench, but even he seemed shaken by the child's unexpected outburst. Emma remained standing in the gallery, her small chest heaving with the effort of her emotional declaration, while Dorothy fumbled with trembling hands to pull her granddaughter back to her seat. The little girl's face was flushed with the righteous anger that only children can express when confronted with what they perceive as fundamental unfairness. "Your Honor," Lisa Chun shot to her feet with an urgency that surprised everyone in the courtroom, including herself. Her legal mind was racing, connecting dots that had been invisible just moments before. "I request an immediate sidebar to discuss this new testimony." District Attorney Preston's face had gone ashen as the implications of Emma's words began to sink in. His political ambitions, built on a foundation of high-profile convictions, suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper in a hurricane. "Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly an emotional outburst from a child who doesn't understand the proceedings. It has no bearing on the evidence in this case." But Judge Hayes was already gesturing both attorneys forward. At 62, Hayes had presided over thousands of criminal cases, and his instincts told him that something significant had just occurred. Children didn't typically have such specific, emotional reactions to testimony about police dogs, unless there was a personal connection involved. As the attorneys huddled around his bench, Emma's grandmother finally managed to coax the agitated child back into her seat. Dorothy's hands shook as she smoothed Emma's hair and whispered urgent, confused questions. "Emma, sweetheart, what are you talking about? When did the dog hurt you?" But Emma's attention remained fixed on Officer Morrison, who sat at the witness table looking like a man watching his career collapse in real time. The confident demeanor he'd maintained throughout his testimony had cracked, replaced by the pale, sweaty appearance of someone whose carefully constructed lies were being exposed by the most unlikely of witnesses. At the sidebar, Lisa Chun spoke. In urgent whispers, her words tumbling out in a rush of sudden understanding. "Your Honor, I believe this child has first-hand knowledge of prior incidents involving the police dog in question. She's clearly had a traumatic encounter with Rex that was never disclosed during discovery." Preston tried to maintain his composure, but his voice carried a note of desperation. "This is obviously a coached response, Your Honor. The defense is trying to create a distraction from the overwhelming physical evidence in this case." Judge Hayes studied Emma across the courtroom, noting the genuine distress in her small face and the protective way her grandmother held her. "Ms. Chun, are you saying this child was personally involved in an incident with Rex that the prosecution failed to disclose?" "I believe so, Your Honor. I'm requesting permission to question the child about her knowledge of the dog's behavior and any prior incidents that might bear on Rex's reliability as a detection animal." The legal machinery of the courtroom began shifting into emergency mode as Judge Hayes considered the unprecedented situation. In 30 years of criminal law, he'd never had a case derailed by a 7-year-old spontaneous testimony, but the child's reaction had been too genuine, too specific to ignore. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Martinez sat in the witness waiting area, feeling as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. Emma's outburst had triggered a cascade of memories that she'd been trying to suppress for months. The elementary school demonstration, the carefully worded incident reports, the whispered conversations about liability and public relations, all of it came flooding back with crystal clarity. She remembered arriving at Lincoln Elementary that day to find Morrison frantically cleaning blood from Rex's muzzle while school officials rushed around trying to contain the situation. Emma Thompson had been sitting in the nurse's office, her small arm wrapped in gauze, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. It was just an accident, Morrison had insisted to anyone who would listen. Rex was overstimulated by all the children. He's never done anything like this before. But Sarah had noticed things that day that troubled her deeply. Rex's aggressive posture, the way he'd continued to strain against his leash, even after being corrected, the wildness in his eyes that spoke of an animal barely under control. She'd started to voice her concerns, but Morrison had cut her off with a sharp look and a reminder about maintaining unit cohesion. The incident report had been filed, but key details had been mysteriously omitted from the final version. The school district had been quietly compensated for Emma's medical expenses, and all parties had signed confidentiality agreements that sealed the records from public view. Rex had returned to active duty without any additional behavioral evaluation or training modifications. Now, watching the legal proceedings unfold from her position in the witness area, Sarah realized that Emma's innocent honesty was about to expose a conspiracy of silence that went far beyond a single dog bite. If Rex had been exhibiting aggressive behavior months before Marcus Thompson's arrest, it called into question not only the dog's reliability as a detection animal, but also the integrity of every case Rex had been involved in during that time period. Judge Hayes returned to his seat and addressed the courtroom with the gravity of someone who understood that the next few minutes would determine the course of justice in this case. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a brief recess while counsel addresses some procedural matters that have just come to light. Court will reconvene in 30 minutes. As the gavel fell, Emma looked up at her grandmother with the innocent confusion of a child who had simply told the truth and couldn't understand why it had caused such chaos. "Grandma Dorothy, why is everyone so upset?" "I just told them Rex was a bad dog. He hurt me, remember?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears as she finally understood the magnitude of what her granddaughter had just accomplished with two simple words. The little girl's honesty had just torn open a cover-up that could save her father's life. The 30-minute recess stretched into 3 hours as Judge Hayes's chambers became the epicenter of a legal earthquake that would reshape the Franklin County justice system. What had begun as a routine drug possession trial had exploded into a full-scale investigation involving the district attorney's office, internal affairs, and the state attorney general's criminal division. Lisa Chun sat across from Emma Thompson in the courthouse's victim services room, her legal pad filled with notes that read like a thriller novel. The little girl answered questions with the startling clarity that children possess when recounting traumatic experiences, her memory untainted by the adult tendency to rationalize or minimize the disturbing events. "A doggy was shaking," Emma explained, her small hands mimicking Rex's trembling behavior, "and his eyes looked scared. Not happy dog. Scared, like when there's thunder. Means scared, like he wanted to hurt someone." Dorothy held Emma's other hand, her own fingers trembling as she listened to details about the elementary school incident that had never been fully disclosed to her. The confidentiality agreement she'd signed had been presented as a routine formality, a way to ensure Emma's privacy while the school district covered her medical expenses. She hadn't realized she was helping to bury evidence of a dangerous animal's behavioral problems. Meanwhile, in Judge Hayes's chambers, District Attorney Preston found himself fighting for his political life. His phone had been buzzing incessantly with calls from local news stations, who'd somehow learned about the courtroom disruption. The story was already spreading across social media. Little girl exposes police dog conspiracy during father's trial. "Your Honor," Preston said, his voice hoarse from stress. "Even if there was a prior incident with the dog, it doesn't negate the physical evidence found in Mr. Thompson's vehicle. We still have cocaine that was recovered from his glove compartment." Judge Hayes fixed Preston with a stare that could have frozen lava. "Mr. Preston, if this dog has a history of behavioral problems that was concealed from defense attorneys, it calls into question the reliability of every search Rex has conducted. That includes the search of Mr. Thompson's vehicle." Internal Affairs Detective Rebecca Morrison, no relation to Officer Jake Morrison, had arrived at the courthouse. With a team of investigators and a court order to examine all records related to Rex's service history. What they discovered in the first hour of their review painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception and evidence suppression. "Judge Hayes," Detective Morrison reported during an emergency conference, "we've uncovered at least 7 separate incidents involving Rex's aggressive behavior over the past 18 months. None of these incidents were included in his official service record or reported to the state certification board. The incidents ranged from Rex snapping at fellow officers during training exercises to attacking a suspect who was already in handcuffs during an arrest. Each event had been quietly handled through internal discipline, medical settlements, or simple bureaucratic burial. The pattern suggested not isolated behavioral problems, but a systematic cover-up designed to protect the K-9 program's reputation and funding. More damning still was the discovery of Rex's veterinary records, which revealed that the dog had been prescribed anxiety medication for the past 6 months. A fact that should have immediately disqualified him from active duty according to state K-9 certification standards. Officer Jake Morrison sat in a holding room down the hall, his 18-year career imploding around him like a controlled demolition. Internal Affairs had seized his personal phone, his department computer, and his service weapon pending the outcome of their investigation. His attorney, hastily summoned from a golf course, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his client's legal exposure. "Jake, they're talking about evidence tampering, perjury, conspiracy, and civil rights violations," the attorney whispered urgently. "If they can prove you knowingly used an unreliable dog to conduct searches, you're looking at federal charges." But the investigation was uncovering evidence far worse than an unreliable drug dog. Detective Martinez, finally freed from her loyalty to the department by Emma's courage, had spent the past 2 hours providing investigators with information that painted a picture of deliberate corruption rather than mere incompetence. The breakthrough came when investigators examined traffic camera footage from the gas station where Marcus Thompson had stopped for coffee on the night of his arrest. The timestamp showed Thompson's Honda Civic at the station 23 minutes before Morrison claimed to have initiated the traffic stop. More importantly, it showed Morrison's patrol car arriving at the same station just 4 minutes after Thompson had left. "He followed him," Detective Martinez explained to the stunned investigators. Morrison wasn't doing a random traffic stop for a broken taillight. He was specifically targeting Thompson's vehicle. Security footage from the gas station revealed Morrison approaching Thompson's Honda while it was parked and unattended. The video quality wasn't perfect, but enhancement specialists could clearly see Morrison opening the passenger door and placing something inside the glove compartment before closing it again and returning to his patrol car. The evidence bag containing the cocaine allegedly found in Thompson's vehicle was tested for Morrison's fingerprints that had no legitimate reason to be there. If the drugs had truly been hidden by Thompson, the lab results were unambiguous. Morrison's prints were all over the evidence. When confronted with this physical proof of his crimes, Morrison's carefully constructed defense collapsed entirely. Faced with decades in federal prison, he broke down and confessed to a conspiracy that went far beyond a single false arrest. "It started small," Morrison admitted during his videotaped confession. "Rex was having problems, getting aggressive, giving false alerts. But the department had too much invested in the K-9 program to admit we had a bad dog, so we started helping the alerts along." Morrison revealed that he had planted evidence in at least 12 other cases over the past 8 months, using Rex's reputation to provide legal justification for searches that would have otherwise been inadmissible. Innocent people had been convicted, families destroyed, and lives ruined to protect a lie that had grown too big to contain. As news of Morrison's confession spread through the courthouse, Marcus Thompson sat in stunned silence, knowing that his 7-year-old daughter's simple honesty had not only saved his freedom, but exposed a corruption scandal that would reverberate through the justice system for years to come. Emma, oblivious to the magnitude of the chaos she had unleashed, colored quietly in her book and asked her grandmother when they could finally go home and have the ice cream she'd been promised. 6 months after Emma Thompson's 2 words had shattered a conspiracy of silence, Franklin County Courthouse buzzed with a very different kind of energy. Judge Hayes sat behind his bench on a crisp spring morning, preparing to deliver a ruling that would officially close one of the most significant corruption cases in Ohio's legal history. The same courtroom where Marcus Thompson had faced 15 years in prison now hosted a packed gallery of reporters, legal observers, and families whose lives had been forever changed by a 7-year-old's courage to speak truth to power. Marcus sat in the front row with Emma beside him, both dressed in their finest clothes for this final chapter of their ordeal. Emma wore a new yellow dress that her father had bought with his first paycheck from his new job as a construction supervisor. Position he'd secured after his exoneration made headlines across the state. Her hair was pulled back in the same pigtails she'd worn on that fateful day, but now yellow ribbons had been replaced with bright blue ones that matched her father's tie. The past half year had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The city of Columbus had settled Marcus's wrongful prosecution lawsuit for $2.8 million, an amount that ensured Emma's college education and provided financial security the Thompson family had never known. More importantly, it had restored Marcus's faith in a justice system that had initially failed him so catastrophically. "The court finds," Judge Hayes began, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority earned through 3 decades of service, "that the systematic corruption exposed in this case represents a fundamental betrayal of the public trust. Officer Jake Morrison's actions, enabled by institutional negligence and willful blindness, resulted in the wrongful prosecution of at least 14 innocent citizens." Morrison himself was notably absent from the proceedings. 3 months earlier, he had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to civil rights violations, evidence tampering, perjury, and conspiracy charges. His confession had triggered a cascade of overturned convictions, dismissed charges, and multi-million-dollar settlements that would burden Franklin County's budget for years to come. Rex, the German shepherd whose fabricated reputation had provided cover for so much injustice, had been quietly retired from service and placed with a specialized rescue organization that worked with traumatized police dogs. Veterinary evaluations revealed that the dog had been suffering from severe anxiety and neurological issues that made him unsuitable for police work, conditions that should have been identified and addressed months before Emma's elementary school demonstration. Detective Sarah Martinez sat in the gallery's second row, wearing the uniform of her new position with the Ohio Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit. Her decision to break the code of silence and cooperate with internal investigators had cost her friendships within the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, but it had also earned her a promotion and the respect of law enforcement professionals who valued integrity over loyalty to corruption. "The evidence presented in this case," Judge Hayes continued, "demonstrates that institutional pressures to maintain successful conviction rates can create perverse incentives that undermine the very justice these institutions are designed to serve. The court therefore recommends comprehensive reforms to K-9 certification processes, mandatory disclosure requirements for animal behavioral incidents, and enhanced oversight of evidence collection procedures." Emma listened to the judge's words with the patient attention of a child who had learned that adult conversations sometimes contained important information about her world. She didn't understand all the legal terminology, but she grasped that the grown-ups were talking about making sure bad things like what happened to her daddy wouldn't happen to other daddies and mommies. During the investigation, Emma had become something of a celebrity among legal professionals and child advocacy groups. Her photograph appeared on magazine covers alongside headlines like "The 7-year-old who reformed criminal justice" and "When truth comes from the mouths of babes." Documentary filmmakers had approached the family about telling Emma's story, but Marcus had politely declined all media requests, preferring to let his daughter return to the normal childhood that had been interrupted by their legal ordeal. The reforms triggered by Emma's testimony extended far beyond Franklin County. The Ohio legislature had passed comprehensive K-9 accountability legislation, requiring psychological evaluations for all police dogs, mandatory reporting of behavioral incidents, and independent oversight of drug detection operations. Similar laws were under consideration in 12 other states, as legal professionals grappled with the implications of how easily fabricated evidence could masquerade as scientific reliability. Lisa Chun, the public defender whose career had been transformed by her accidental involvement in the case, now served as director of Ohio's new Conviction Review Unit, a state-funded organization dedicated to investigating potential wrongful convictions. Her first major case involved reviewing the 14 other prosecutions that had relied on Rex's allegedly reliable drug detection capabilities. As Judge Hayes concluded his remarks and formally closed the proceedings, Marcus placed his arm around Emma's shoulders and whispered, "Ready to go get that ice cream I promised you, sweetheart?" Emma looked up at her father with the same sparkling eyes that had seen through adult deceptions and spoken truth when truth was desperately needed. "Can we get chocolate chip?" she asked, her priorities firmly focused on the important matters. That occupied a 7-year-old's attention. "Anything you want, Emma. You've earned it." As they walked down the courthouse steps into the warm spring sunshine, Emma skipped beside her father with the carefree joy of a child whose faith in justice had been validated. She had learned that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes, that important. People sometimes told lies, but that truth had a power all its own when spoken with courage and conviction. Behind them, the courthouse continued its daily work of dispensing justice, now operating under new procedures and enhanced oversight, designed to prevent the kind of systematic deception that had nearly destroyed an innocent family. Emma Thompson's 2 words, "bad dog," had accomplished what years of legal reform efforts had failed to achieve, proving that sometimes the most profound truths come from the most innocent sources. And somewhere in Ohio, other children would grow up in a justice system made more just by a 7-year-old girl who simply refused to let adults pretend that bad dogs were good.